Coach, it's always a delight when we get to chat with some of your friends from your days working at ESPN. And normally, when we do our watch along show for UGA Sports, we tell people it's okay if you don't listen to the broadcasters. But when we take a halftime break, we always try to send people to Kevin Negandhi.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so proud of Kevin. When I was first leaving up there, he was just starting and just a real good guy, but and very talented. It was obvious he was going to move up, but at the same time, I'm not going to hold his Philly allegiance against him. But everybody around here, everybody hears so much about Philly from our coach Jack Bowerly, our swimming coach. But Kevin, real thrilled to have you today, and just so proud of what you're doing in Sports Center and all the different things that you're doing from helping with the cancer. It's just really a real treat to have you.
Coach, it's great to see you as well. And Dayne, thank you so much for the introduction. And let me tell you this. You were one of the early believers in me when I was trying to figure my way out through Bristol, and I'm always thankful for that. And it's always great to hear from you. And let's talk ball. And if I bring up Philadelphia, I'm really proud that I can bring up Georgia Bulldogs that represent the Philadelphia Eagles as well, because they've been playing really well of late. Jalen Carter's been standing out of late, so we'll take that as well.
Yeah, we got plenty of them up there. So just from a national perspective here, next week we're coming out with the playoff teams, the first week of it. And what's some teams that a little bit on the edge there that, everybody knows about the conference leaders and all that. Tell us a little bit, because you're in the back room there with all the guys, and you get to see everybody. Who's got your attention that maybe might just jump in there at the end?
Coach, I think when you look at the way the structure is, BYU is one of those quiet teams. They are undefeated that no one really talks about, and the schedule doesn't really. In November, you're going to see a handful of teams, and we'll talk a little bit about Georgia's schedule, and they're going to be tested, especially in the SEC, especially in the Big Ten. I think BYU is one of those teams that can run the table, sneak in. The Big 12, it felt wide open from the start. You could have picked 6 teams, and they were in the running. And I think a lot of people just leaned on Utah, and then they fell apart because of injuries. Just the depth that BYU has, the maturity that BYU has. I've said this about a month into the season. Teams like BYU, teams like Army, teams like Navy. It's unfortunate what happened to Navy this past week because they didn't play Navy football. But when you have teams like that in the NIL and the transfer portal era, they're going to succeed because they're not losing a lot of players. They're not bringing in a lot of players. You have continuity. You have maturity. You stick to a game plan. Yeah, the identity of the team is built into the core, and it's not coming in with maybe 10 or 15 new kids. And that's the way of the world with many of these major programs. It's fine. But I think you're going to see programs like BYU succeed. And BYU's always been a storyline because you're going to have a 22, 23, 24-year-old kid who obviously went on a mission, coming back bigger, stronger than most 18, 19-year-old kids, and they dominate on the line. So I just think that BYU is one of those quiet teams that keep an eye on them. Retzloff plays really, really well. He's smart, doesn't rush a lot of things. They could be really dangerous there when the seedings come out. And, we'll see how this plays out, but I think BYU is a team that's not going to get rattled down the stretch.
Yeah, it makes a good point about the continuity. I never forget in '84 we played them in the Holiday Bowl, and both teams landed about the same time, and their team was getting off the plane, and every guy that got off the plane had a couple kids in his arms. They had all these older kids. Players, and that's when Steve Young was the quarterback, and they threw a throwback pass to him to win the game. And I shouldn't be talking about it. It makes me sick because we had him. But let's talk about the Big Ten, because obviously all the people around here, SEC conscious. But what a big game we got with Penn State, and particularly with their quarterback in a situation where he's up for grabs, whether he can play. How do you feel about the Nittany Lions against the Buckeyes this week?
There's a lot of pressure on James Franklin because when you expanded the playoff, if you look at, if we had the expansion of the playoff of 12 teams over the last decade, I think a handful of teams that were with James Franklin would have made it. The issue has always been they're good, not great, right? You win 9, 10 games, but you have 2 losses on your resume, and it's always Ohio State, it's always Michigan. I grew up in a Penn State family, so I hear about it all the time. James is a phenomenal recruiter. They have a ton of talent. This felt like, hey, maybe this is the year. Michigan is down, Ohio State stacked, but they're still trying to figure things out. But the Aller injury plays a role here. They didn't look really that great. I thought Ohio State had to grind out a little bit too much against Nebraska. It's interesting. They spent the money in the portal with, Judkins, and they have Trevion Henderson. But Ohio State really could not run the football last week against Nebraska as they're in Chip Kelly's offense. So I think Ohio State prevails just because they have their talent's so ridiculous. Their secondary is really, really good. They spent a ton of money in the portal. I think that they've got the explosive playmakers to win a game like this, and then it's just going to haunt James Franklin. But with the expansion of the playoff, Franklin could still be in this conversation. I don't think anybody here in this discussion at the beginning of the season had Indiana undefeated going into November, right? So you're going to have potentially, you're going to have Oregon potentially, of course, because they're, rolling right now. Ohio State. Where does Penn State fall on that third team from the Big Ten to get in if Indiana's still rolling, if Penn State doesn't handle their business? And also, if they get shocked potentially in a game that you kind of take for granted for them down the road, because Penn State can give you a stinker every now and then. And with Aller not right, I'd be a little concerned there if I'm a Nittany Lion fan.
Yeah, and his record against the big teams in the league, against the Michigan and Ohio State, is very dismal. But hopefully, maybe they can make a comeback this week. And finally, before we hit up on the SEC, the ACC, Miami's a team that has been on the brink a couple of times. But boy, what a quarterback they got, and the schedule really looks pretty favorable going down the stretch for them. And everybody knows about Clemson, but Pitt, undefeated, and SMU. I mean, there's some good teams in the ACC that probably going to knock each other off, and still looks to me like 2 at the most out of that league. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think you're right. And the ACC always finds a way to knock each other out. We're all waiting. I mean, Pitt's a phenomenal story, what Narduzzi's done, and to bring in the young kid that was in the quarterback room a year ago at Alabama, Eli Holstein. Like, I'm waiting for Pitt to fall apart, but their quarterback is playing really well. He doesn't get phased, doesn't make silly mistakes. It's interesting with SMU because I think SMU was like one of those, popular sleeper picks at the start of the season to win the ACC, and then they struggled early on. They can score. Their quarterback is extremely talented. So I think SMU could surprise somebody. But with Miami's going to have a run all the way to the conference championship game. And you mentioned their quarterback is Cam Ward's fantastic. He's the perfect fit for that system because the roster is amazing, but they needed one guy who was extremely mature, always calm, never panics, no matter how things are going around him. And we've seen him multiple times play heroics and lead the team because he's just like this the entire time, right? And I think that plays a big role here. So I think Miami gets in. I'm glad you brought up SMU. Keep an eye on SMU and the talent that they have because they could score points. And they're on track here to potentially a showdown if Pitt goes down, that we could see them in the ACC championship game against Miami.
And Clemson, your take on them?
Oh, wait. You know what? I'm so glad you brought that up. I hope Dabo doesn't get mad at me because Clemson is one. I think Dabo actually enjoys that no one talks about Clemson. And I completely forgot about Clemson after what happened in that Georgia game. But we've been talking about Clemson looking like the old Clemson ever since that Georgia game because Klubnik and Maffa, they've been playing the way that we all expected for them to play at the beginning of the season, the opener. Obviously, when you get punched in the face in that first half, it's really hard to get back on track, especially with the Georgia team that was prepared. But Dabo loves it. I think Dabo loves that no one's talking about him. He got the mojo back, and they're quietly winning. And you know what, Dabo? I apologize for not including them in the conversation because they'll be there in the end. They're going to knock. Yeah, I got actually, while we're talking here, I'm going to pull up Clemson's schedule just to see because they could play a critical role here in how this is going to shape out for the ACC and the seedings here because you could see them potentially getting a top 4 seed. Let me pull this up real quick with Dabo, if you don't mind, because that is
Dabo
team.
watches our show every week too, so he'll be.
Oh
glad.
man, Dabo, I think I did your work. I overlooked you and then I praised you, and I want to buy stock in you. So we've been talking about buying stock in Dabo after I think. They got on track after a couple of weeks, and then he had the swagger back, and he was barking, and you're like, okay, Dabo's feeling good about this team now that they're all together. They got a Louisville game, and Louisville's hard to really figure out week in and week out. They'll play tough, but the showdown, I'm glad I pulled it up. The showdown's going to be on the 16th when they take on Pitt on the road. That'll be a really big game with the conference ramifications. And we'll understand, I think, we'll learn a little bit more of where Pitt is. And then I can't wait for the classic rivalry game because South Carolina is just such a dangerous team if they had consistent quarterback play. Defensively, man, they're going to be trouble for years to come.
And it starts with that this weekend, Kevin, where Texas A&M has made the headlines in the SEC, and the reward for that is a trip to Columbia to face that defensive front. What does that game mean for the SEC, and just your general thoughts on the SEC so far with a month to go?
Well, if you like, and Dayne, anybody likes lines and physicality, that's the game you circle, right? Because I think that the last 2 weeks, the biggest games were determined by the lines. Georgia's line at Texas punched the Longhorns in the mouth defensively, and they did whatever they wanted. A&M's line in the second half against LSU basically punched the Tigers in the mouth, confused the quarterback, and they did whatever they wanted with the momentum. It really helps too. You have Kyle Field, and after that pick by Nussmeier, I mean, they're up by 10, and suddenly you look up again, and you have Marcel Reed just running all over them with the energy of that field, right? That the freshman quarterback and the offensive and defensive lines just dictated everything. To me, this comes off of now Elko. What does he do with this team? They're reading all the headlines. They're feeling really good about themselves, and they got to face a Shane Beamer team that will shock you if you overlook them. Look what LSU had to deal with. They got really lucky in that game on the road early in the season. So to me, the game comes down to South Carolina's quarterback play, because if Norris doesn't get hurt against LSU in the second half, Carolina beats them. They were playing that well at home in that environment. How does A&M respond to the quarterback play of South Carolina? And how does A&M's quarterback handle it now with Marcel Reed? They've gone back and forth. Wigman did not look comfortable in the first half. I thought it was a great decision with Marcel Reed. But, can you control the line for that quarterback to do whatever he wants to do? That'll, I think, be the biggest storyline going in.
Most definitely. I mean, that's a tough place to play and on the road. Now we're going to get into the Bulldogs, and there's two ladies that I want you to represent here. One, your wife, and one, one's a big Gator fan and one a big Dog fan, and you spend a lot of time with both of them. So you're kind of in the middle here in this game. So tell us a little bit about how all this came down, marrying a Gator and working with a big Dog fan who's really kind of enjoying all of it. I saw her that she was out on the sideline for the Texas game. She actually took a selfie with my grandson had his picture made with her. So that was a real thrill for her.
Yeah, Elle's the best. And she was living her best life in Austin, when that was going on. She was nervous going into that game, Coach. Now, listen, I married a Gator. I met her in Florida. She was on TV. Monica is the best. And a die hard. Like, I'm a diehard Philly fan, so I can relate to her SEC fandom. And so she's been miserable in this series the last few years. And in the last 3 years, I've been with Elle on the 6th. So I'm caught in between Saturday text exchange while I'm in the ABC studio and they're talking trash to each other. And I just lay out. I lay out because happy wife, happy life, but I can't do anything about the scoreboard. They're both great trash talkers, and they do it in their own way, in subtle remarks. And the funny thing is, Saturday night is a big dinner, and it's a gala that my wife helps put together for Connecticut Children's, because that's where she works. And Elle is one of the guests that my wife invited at this table. And of course, that game's going to be taking place in the afternoon on ABC, leading into the gala. So I'm glad. That's one of those nights, Jim. I am so happy. I'm in studio and I'm away from both of them.
Yeah.
So I don't have to get caught in between because there's going to be a lot of chatter, back and forth conversation. But Els had the last word recently, and I think she may have that again because listen, Georgia. The best part of what Georgia did against Texas is that everybody was talking about Texas going into that game. We heard Kirby post game, right? That Georgia team looked like that defensive front looked like the 2021 team, the 2022 team. They were pissed off. They were angry. I mean, Jalen Walker was unbelievable. And to have 3 sacks, he lived in the backfield, and Quinn Ewers was seeing ghosts. So I think Georgia is one of the most fascinating teams when you look at the schedule because you got Ole Miss, you got Tennessee. Like, you've got teams, you got this schedule that's daunting in front of you. You can't overlook every single game. You can't count these guys out because I think they're going to trend and get better and better, and that's why they beat Texas because when you looked at who Texas played, they didn't play anybody. Georgia went through some muck early on, right? They played some tough teams, so they were prepared for the great environment for a tough team. And I think that benefits them long term when we talk about potentially having a deep run in the playoff. I really like Carson Beck. ETN played like the ETN that we were expecting to see, that we saw at Florida. He was running with, I think, a vengeance and with authority, and he was making sharp cuts. And if you have ETN doing that, it changes the entire outlook of what Carson Beck wants to do throwing the football.
Yeah, we're set up for play action and getting that going. Plus, we got Ratledge coming back at guard. But as you mentioned, getting Michael Williams and Brinson back just helped our defensive front. And going into talking a little bit more about the national perspective, because all we hear around here, but it's pretty obvious the imprint that Kirby has made nationally with the way he's taken over college football as far as the dominance, except for the losses to Alabama. But your perception of what all's happened here at Georgia in the last 5 years.
He's the best coach in college football now that Nick Saban is on our team at ESPN. And Kirby understands how to build a team. He understands how to adapt to the team. He understands how to adapt to the culture of college football dramatically changing over the last 5 years. I really admire how Kirby has gone about his business on the field. And he is the ability to retain talent in the NIL, especially when you're getting a bunch of 4- and 5-star guys that have to wait potentially in line, and then for the next group to be ready and the next group to be ready. That's kind of how you build a dynasty, right? We saw that with Urban Meyer. We saw that with Miami 20 years ago. We saw that with Nick. You are building basically not just this team, but you're building a roster that when you lose this group, you can just come back and it's the next group. It's hard to do that nowadays with NIL and transfer portal and playing time, right? He could still maintain that and still build that swagger. I really admire that. I mean, there are issues, and it's well documented about the trouble that some of the players have gotten, into. But I think Kirby's one of those guys that's going to figure this out. And I just say this about Georgia. I admire the program. I admire all the things that they represent on the field. I admire their toughness. I just sometimes just don't understand when we see some of the other headlines. It's like, why don't we have a program where's an Uber? And I don't know it, Coach. You know more than me. You guys know more than me. Like, many of these guys have to do that because then that helps you dramatically with a lot of the other headlines. But what the one thing I think Kirby does is when he sees something, he adjusts, he figures it out. And nationally, I think that he's the best coach perception-wise, and people that know what they're talking about, he's the best coach in the game right now. And I don't think anything's getting in the way of stopping him from continuing that conversation this year, next year.
Kevin, in our final 3 minutes here, one of your teammates early on at ESPN was Jim Donnan. Take me back to those days. Any stories you have from Coach Donnan watching games together in studio at ESPN?
Dayne, so I was one of those guys that was just trying to get in, right? Trying to get in and access, and you meet so many people. And I joined ESPN in 2006, so you meet there were so many big personalities, and I'm just trying to get by. The best thing about Coach and what he did to me, and I'll never forget it, he treated me like I belonged there from the start. There are some people, when you join, it's kind of like being a rookie, right, in a locker room. You just want to belong, put your head down and work. And that's kind of my attitude, head down and just work. And every time I was around Jim in the studio doing a segment, he always respected me and acted like I belonged there and made me feel comfortable from the get-go. I'll never forget that. There were times that some people didn't make you feel that way. And if you don't have that type of teamwork, it's tough to have good TV and chemistry. And Jim understood what it was like to be a leader and a guy that sets the tone. And I was always grateful for that. And it just shows how, when you talk to past players that played under coach, how they adore him and admire him, it just shows how much of a leader he was in the locker room, on the field. And he carried that in the studio when we'd watch games or talk about games. And then the cool thing is, years later, he'll send me a text. Hey, I'm watching on TV. That's a great point. Tell Elle I said hi. Or you look sharp today. Those small little things go a long, long way, because you get in this TV bubble, this Bristol bubble, and you forget that what you're doing is going out to millions of people. So to hear back from an old familiar face and somebody that knows and understands the business, it goes a long way, and those moments brighten my day. So it's always great to actually catch up with Jim and talk about football.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate you saying that, but also it's kind of like a coach having a freshman football player and seeing potential, and then seeing the way he's developed, and certainly you've gone from a rocket spaceship, the way you've moved up, and to be the number one guy up there on SportsCenter and college football. But a lot of people don't realize what you do for cancer. Just finish up with that, with what you do with Dickie V, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, and so Dick Vitale and I formed a great relationship in Sarasota. That's where I was before I came to ESPN. I was on the air there, and I was at Dick Vitale's first gala, and it wasn't even a gala. It was just a gathering in the back of his house to raise money for the V Foundation for pediatric cancer. And Dick, if you open Dick's contact book or whatever he stores on his phone, I mean, he knows literally anybody and everybody, and you can't say no to Dick Vitale. So if he calls you and says, "I need you here," I need you there. So he had about 100 people at his house, raised some money, and now it's gotten to the point where every May, the Dick Vitale Gala, I've had the honor to MC it for the last 6 years after the late great John Saunders passed away, and he was the MC, and he started with Dick Vitale. We have raised $93 million. Last year at the gala, we raised just under $25 million, and it's over 1,000 people at the gala. We share stories about kids, and he'll go up there. Jim, the most amazing thing that he does is he'll go up there unscripted for 30 minutes and recount personal stories about so many children and what they've gone through. And he talks about, hey, I've battled cancer, and he's gone through it for 4 or 5 times now in the last 4 years, and he always wins. And he talks about the courage these kids represent the entire time. And I mean, there's not a dry eye in the entire building every single year. It's an emotional roller coaster. And to be a part of that, I'm really, really honored. And I told Dick, you're in maybe 15 Hall of Fames and counting, but this is your legacy, you and your wife. This is the legacy you're going to leave, because 100% of your donations to this gala and the V Foundation goes directly to cancer research. So to raise nearly $100 million, because the goal this year is $100 million. We're going to surpass $100 million. To get over $100 million for pediatric cancer research, incredible what he has done over the last 20 years, him and his wife.
Well, hey, Kevin, we really appreciate this, and mention to Elle not to worry anything about the game. We're on cruise control. We got it, and tell your wife she doesn't even need to watch it. But no.
Jim, I won't say that to my wife, but I will pass that on to Elle. Trust me,
All right.
she'll feel better about it.
Great job. Thanks a lot, buddy.